All right, so today we're going to be factoring our trinomials. We're going to use two things to do this, and I'm going to do them simultaneously. I'm going to show you with an area model, like we did with multiplying. I'm also going to show you with grouping, so you'll see that grouping really is the distributive property kind of in reverse. So I do want you to note that while I'm going to work these problems both ways, the factoring by grouping, that's going to be the method that will be preferred among your Algebra 2 teachers later in life. I know some of you that go to Kumon use the X thing, and anyway, there's a bunch of different ways to do this, but I do want to emphasize that grouping will be what will be used later, so make sure you're comfortable with it. All right, so first recall that a quadratic trinomial, right, we can write in the form, we have our A coefficient of our x squared term, plus b is the coefficient of our x term, plus c is our constant. Always, and hopefully you remember from yesterday that when you start factoring, the first thing I want you to look for is that GCF. All right, please pull out, bring out, divide out any GCF that you can first. All right, otherwise you'll have to do it later, and it'll be a long process getting there. All right, so the second thing we're going to do after we pulled out any GCF is we're going to need to find two factors, all right, two factors who give us the product of A times C. So in our trinomial, I'm going to multiply the coefficient A and this constant C, and I want two numbers that will multiply to give me that product. But I also want those two numbers to give me the sum. If I add them together, I should get B, the coefficient for my x term. All right, so we're going to look at how that works. All right, so first we're going to do this with an area model. So I'm going to factor 2x squared minus 5x minus 3. Again, is there a GCF? There's no common factors between these three terms, so I'm going to start factoring without pulling out GCF because there isn't one. All right, so the first thing we're going to look at is what is A times C? So A is 2, my C is negative 3. So 2 times negative 3 gives me negative 6. So I need two numbers that multiply to give me negative 6. But I want them to have a sum. Let me erase this real quick. I want them to have a sum of my B term. My B term is negative 5. All right, so I need two numbers that multiply to give me negative 6 and give me a sum of negative 5. So those two numbers are going to be negative 6 and 1. All right, negative 6 times 1 gives me negative 6, and negative 6 plus 1 gives me this negative 5. All right, so we're going to, just like we did multiplying, start with our box, but we're going backwards now. So I'm going to fill in this x squared term is going to go up here, and my constant, negative 3, is going to be in this bottom box. So remember, we always had these two terms in here that had like terms. So that's where I'm going to put my two x terms. Well, these two numbers that I just found are going to be my coefficients for my x term. So I need a negative 6x and I need a positive 1x, or just x. You can write 1x. All right, then we're going to factor out each column, and we're going to factor out each row. So we're going to end up with those two binomials that we used when we multiplied them last time. So if I look at my columns, between 2x squared and 1x, what common factor do we have? Well, we have an x. All right, between negative 6x and negative 3, what factor do we have in common? Since this one on the top is a negative, we do want to factor out negative 3. All right, then I'm going to go by row. This row has a common factor of 2x. I'm not going to bring out the negative because the one it's right next to isn't negative. So we're just going to bring out the positive 2x. And here I have no common factors other than 1, so that is what I bring out. So now we have our two binomials. We are factored. I have x minus 3 times 2x plus 1. All right, to do the same problem by grouping, we still need this table. We still want those two factors that multiply to give us AC, add to give us B. But now I'm going to take this middle term and I'm going to break it apart into two factors. So I still have my 2x squared. But instead of writing minus 5x, I'm going to write minus 6x plus 1x. And you don't need the 1, but I'm going to go ahead and write it just so we see. I still just have negative 5x here if I combine like terms, but I'm splitting it apart. And then I have minus 3. All right, so now that I've broken this into 4 terms, I'm going to group the first 2 terms together and my last 2 terms together. This is still all addition, subtraction. This does not mean I'm multiplying. Notice I have addition here. Okay, so now I look at this group. Do these 2 terms have any common factors? They have a 2 and an x, so we bring that out. And I'm left with x minus 3 plus, now these 2 terms don't have any like factors, so I'm going to bring out just a 1. But that's important. We are bringing out 1. So I'm left with x minus 3. Now, if you'll notice, once I do that, I'm left with this common factor. If I look at this whole thing as one term and this whole thing as one term that I'm adding together, they both have that common factor of x minus 3. So I have the x minus 3. And once I factor that out, right, what am I left with? 2x plus 1. So there are my factors. All right, let's try another one. Any GCF here? Nope. No common factors to bring out. So I need 2 numbers that will multiply. Now they'll have a 1 here. 1 times 36. So multiply to give me 36 and will give me a sum of a positive 13. So that would be 9 times 4. Now, I've been doing this a while. It might take you a little bit of time to figure out what those factors are, but I need 9 and I need 4. All right, so in the area model, take our x squared in the top corner. My constant of 36 is in the bottom corner. And then I'm going to break 13x, this middle term, into 2. And we're going to use our 2 numbers that we just found. So I need a 9x and I need a 4x. Then we factor out from each column, factor out from each row. So x squared and x, I can factor out an x. 9x and 36, we can factor out a 9. It's positive. And then each row, I can factor out an x here. And then 4x and 36, we can factor out a 4. So these are my 2 binomial factors, x plus 9 and x plus 4. So by grouping, we would do the same thing. But instead of writing it in a box, I'm just breaking 13x into 9x plus 4x plus 36. Group the first 2 and the last 2 together, bring out common factors. Bring out the 4. Notice they both have that x plus 9. That's going to be one of my factors. And then what's left is the x plus 4, and that's my other factor. You can always check, because if you distribute and multiply back through, you should end up with x squared plus 13x plus 36. All right, so let's try this one. Now I need a number that will multiply. A times c is 20. So I need 2 factors of 20 that will give me a sum of negative 12. So this is going to take a little bit more time to think. All right, I need to multiply and get a positive and add and get a negative. Right? So in order to multiply and get a positive, yet add and get a negative, they're both going to have to be negative. And I notice they're going to be negative 2 and negative 10. If I multiply, I get a positive 20, yet negative 2 plus negative 10 is a negative 12. All right, so we could do this with the area model. For time's sake, I am going to go ahead and do it by grouping. So I have 4x squared minus 2x minus 10x plus 5. So I just am breaking this middle factor, middle term, into two terms, negative 2x and negative 10x. Now we can group. Now be careful. This is subtraction. All right, so I need to keep that with my 10. I'm going to rewrite this as plus a negative 10. I need that. Now I'm going to look at my two terms here. I can bring out a 2 and an x. I'm left with x. Ooh, what happens when I divide 2x by 2x? It's 1. That's important. Do not put 0. 2x divided out a 2x, I'm left with 1. And it's negative. All right, now look, I have x minus 1 here. So I want to end up with x minus 1 when I factor out something here. So notice if I factor out a negative 5, then I'm left with a positive, what did I do wrong here? Oh, I left off my 2. Sorry. Hopefully y'all noticed that. I'm left with a positive 2x minus 1. So now I have that common factor. 2x minus 1 is one factor, and 2x minus 5 is the other. All right. Real quick, this one, a is 1, remember, a times c is 9. I need to add and get a negative 2. I don't know. I've got 9 and 1 and 3 and 3. Those are my only ways to multiply and get 9. And in order to add and get a negative, one of them, they both have to be negative, and there's nothing I can do here. All right, so there wasn't a GCF. Cannot factor it, so we're done. This one is not factorable. All right, last one here. We're almost done. Oh, I noticed right off the bat I do have a GCF. All three of my terms have a factor of 3 that I could factor out. Okay, so make sure we look for that. GCF is 3. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to factor that out. Erase these. So I'm left with 3 times x squared plus 2x minus 3. So now I just need to look at this trinomial and see if I can factor it. When we're done, make sure you don't lose this 3 that you've already factored out. It's going to be 3 times something times something. All right, a times c, 1 times negative 3 is negative 3, and my b value is 2. Two numbers that multiply to give me negative 3, yet will add to give me 2 would be 3 times negative 1. Multiplies gives me negative 3, and 3 plus negative 1 is 2. All right, so I'm going to group. I have x squared plus 3x minus 1x minus 3. So I've just replaced the 2x with 3x minus 1x. I'm going to group. Be careful with this subtraction. We can look at it like this. All right, factor out the x. I'm left with x plus 3. I want this to end up to be x plus 3, so I'm going to factor out a negative 1. Plus or minus negative 1 times x plus 3. So x plus 3 is one factor, and x minus 1 is my other factor. So we're done. When you think you're done, please double check. Make sure none of these factors you had a GCF that you should have brought out at the very beginning. All right, so if you end up with like 2x plus 4 down here, then you need to factor out that 2. All right, so be careful. All right, this will be posted in the classroom if you need to go back and rewatch it, as well as a con video on doing this as well.